Humbled is not the same as humiliated. This distinction needs to be made at the outset because the word carries a potential misreading, the implication of deliberate diminishment, of a power exercise directed at the avoidance ego with the specific intention of producing their deflation. That is not what this piece is about. Humiliation is something done to a person. Humbling is something that happens to a person through the encounter with something that exceeds the capacity of their current self-concept to comfortably contain. The humbling this piece examines is not a strategy. It is not something you do to the avoidant through the correct deployment of behavior or the careful management of your presentation in their presence. It is something that happens in the avoidant's interior when they encounter the full, genuine, unperformed reality of who you are, and find that the reality exceeds what their self-sufficiency narrative, their management system, their carefully maintained positioning as the less invested and more composed party in the dynamic can adequately accommodate. The humbling is the avoidant self-concept meeting its match, not in a confrontational sense, in the specific, quiet, interior sense of someone whose story about themselves and about the dynamic encounters evidence that the story is insufficient. The avoidant self-concept is built, as examined throughout these pieces, around the specific claim of not needing, not requiring much, being the party whose emotional equilibrium is less contingent on the connection's continuation, having the composure and the self-sufficiency that positions them in every relational dynamic they inhabit as the one who could leave first, the one whose investment, while genuine, is demonstrably more contained than the other person's, the one whose inner world is adequately furnished by their own resources, with other people present as welcome additions rather than necessary components. This self-concept has survived across the avoidant's entire relational history because the dynamics the avoidant has inhabited have tended to provide the external confirmation it requires. The other person has needed more, has been more visibly affected by the avoidant's distance, has pursued rather than simply been present, has demonstrated through the quality of their engagement and investment level that the avoidant's more managed engagement could position itself as superior to. The self-sufficiency narrative has not been flatly contradicted by experience. It has been, across many relationships, repeatedly confirmed by the pattern of others' investment exceeding the avoidance. You are the contradiction, not through any deliberate act of challenging the narrative, through the simple, constitutionally genuine, entirely non-performed reality of someone whose relationship with their own worth, their own wholeness, their own life is sufficient enough that the avoidance positioning as the less invested party becomes, in the presence of your actual self, narratively untenable. The humbling happens at specific moments, not continuously. The avoidance management system is sophisticated enough to maintain the narrative against most inputs, but in the specific, unguarded moments when the actual quality of who you are becomes undeniable in a way that the narrative cannot simply process and accommodate. The moment when you disagree with the avoidant directly, without the softening that most people apply to disagreement with someone they are invested in, not aggressively, without hostility, without the need to win the point, but directly, with the specific grounded confidence of someone who has examined the question and arrived at a conclusion and is not adjusting the conclusion in service of managing the avoidance response to it. The avoidant, whose self-concept includes the assumption that they are among the more independently thinking people in most rooms, encounters someone who is not deferring, who is not adjusting their thinking to the avoidant's comfort, who is simply there, with their own mind, fully. The moment when you receive the avoidance withdrawal without the pursuing that the withdrawal was unconsciously calibrated to produce, not with performed indifference, with genuine, grounded continuation of your own life. The withdrawal finds nowhere to land in the form it expected. The management that generated it discovers that the dynamic it was managing against has not responded according to the prediction. The system that was calibrated on the assumption of your orientation toward the avoidance response finds the calibration insufficient for the actual quality of your self-possession. The moment when your life, The actual, specific, fully inhabited life you are living is visible to the avoidant in its genuine richness, not the performed richness of someone demonstrating their fullness for an audience. The actual, ongoing, genuinely yours quality of a person who has interests and friendships and engagement with the world that have nothing to do with the avoidant and that exist with the specific, evidential quality of things that are real rather than constructed. The avoidant, whose self-concept has been maintained partly through the assumption of their own centrality in the dynamic, encounters a life in which they are not the center, in which the center is you, fully, genuinely, irreducibly you. Each of these moments lands in the avoidant's interior as a small disruption of the narrative, not catastrophic. The narrative is resilient and has survived significant inputs without revising itself, but each disruption leaves a residue, a small deposit of evidence against the story, a specific, concrete, remembered instance of encountering something about you that the self-sufficiency narrative was not designed to accommodate. The accumulation of these deposits is the humbling, not any single moment of it. The accumulated weight of repeated encounters with someone who does not confirm the narrative, who does not position themselves beneath the avoidance composure, who does not demonstrate the greater investment that the self-concept requires the other party to demonstrate, who simply, consistently, across every interaction, is fully themselves, without modification for the avoidance comfort, without the adjustment that the dynamic usually produces in the people who inhabit it. The avoidant, experiencing this accumulation, begins to notice something in the interior that is unfamiliar in the specific relational context. The sense of being met, not managed, not pursued, not orbited by someone whose investment is organized around the avoidance response, met by someone whose wholeness is equal to or exceeds their own, by someone in whose presence the self-sufficiency narrative is not being confirmed, but is being quietly, persistently, entirely, unaggressively challenged. The humbling is significant, not because it diminishes the avoidant, because it is the specific interior event that most consistently produces the genuine examination of the self-concept that change requires. The avoidance pattern has sustained itself in part through the narrative's confirmation. While the dynamics the avoidant inhabits keep confirming the self-sufficiency story, keep providing the external evidence of being the less invested, more composed, more independent party, the narrative remains adequate and the examination of the pattern it sustains remains unnecessary. Why examine what the evidence confirms? Your genuine presence, your wholeness, your self-possession, your fully inhabited life removes the confirmation. The external evidence stops supporting the narrative. The narrative begins to feel against the specific evidence of your actual qualities, like a story being maintained through effort rather than one naturally sustained by experience. And a story that requires maintenance against the evidence is a story that is approaching the limit of its sustainability. This is the opening. Not to change, the opening is not the change, and the avoidant who has been humbled by the encounter with your genuine wholeness has not automatically arrived at the internal readiness to do the work that genuine change requires. But the opening to the question, the specific, destabilizing, finally necessary question that the confirmed narrative was successfully preventing, what if the story I have been telling about myself is not the complete truth? The humbling produces this question, and the question, once genuinely asked rather than deflected, is the beginning of the only path toward the genuine change that makes the avoidant capable of the relationship their feeling has always been calling for. You do not humble the avoidant through confrontation. Through the direct challenge to the self-sufficiency narrative, the pointed observation about the pattern, the well-intentioned but ultimately management-activating insistence that the avoidant examine what they are doing. The confrontation gives the avoidant something to defend against, and the avoidant's intellectual sophistication and defensive architecture make them formidable defenders. The challenge narrative often emerges from direct confrontation, more entrenched rather than less. You humble the avoidant through presence, through the daily, unannounced, entirely non-strategic quality of being so genuinely, fully, irreducibly yourself that the narrative cannot accommodate you without revising itself, through the specific, accumulated, evidence deposit quality of someone who keeps being, across every interaction, the complete version of themselves, intellectual, grounded, self-possessed, warm without being consuming, interested without being organized around the avoidance response. Through the quality of meeting them, not pursuing, not orbiting, meeting, as one whole person meets another whole person, with genuine interest, genuine warmth, genuine disagreement, when disagreement is honest, genuine presence without the direction that presence usually carries in the avoidance experience. Through the quality of your leaving, when the leaving becomes necessary. The clean, dignified, you are not enough and I know my own worth departure that provides in its specific quality the most undeniable of the evidence deposits against the narrative. The avoidance self-sufficiency story requires, at its foundation, the assumption that the people who leave are leaving from the position of having needed more than the avoidant could provide. You're leaving from the position of having offered more than the avoidant could receive, inverts this assumption with a completeness that the narrative cannot simply reframe. The humbling is not punishment. It is not something you do to the avoidant in service of any agenda, not the agenda of producing their change, not the agenda of demonstrating your worth, not the agenda of finally making them understand what they have in you. The humbling is the natural consequence of your genuine presence in the avoidance world, of your refusal to be less than you are, of your continued, dignified, entirely authentic existence as someone who has a genuine and settled relationship with their own value and who brings that settled relationship into every interaction, including the interactions with someone whose management system has been trying continuously and with considerable sophistication to prevent exactly this quality of encounter from reaching the interior. It reaches anyway, through the gaps, through the accumulated deposits, through the specific, quiet, finally undeniable weight of repeated encounter with someone who is simply, genuinely, without effort or agenda, or the strategic arrangement of their qualities for maximum effect, more than the narrative can contain. That is the humbling, and it is the most honest, most durable, most genuinely significant thing you can offer the avoidant, not as a gift, not as a strategy, but as the simple, unavoidable consequence of being completely, fully, unapologetically yourself.